Marxist or Marxism from Karl Marx's last name. You remember, every theory is based on every literary theory is based on a non-literary discipline. The archetypal theory is based on psychology. The moral theory is based on ethics. The Marxist theory is based on socioeconomics. Therefore, we need to know something about socioeconomics. What is it? It's the science that studies the interaction between society and economy. Examines how economy affects society and how society affects economy, how they interact, the relationship between society and economy. And that's, of course, his field. That's Marx's field. And he derived his theory and based it on socioeconomics. What does this theory say? We can summarize this theory in one sentence. So this sentence over here, you can see before you, summarizes this theory. All social conflict is caused by class distinction, capitalism, and materialism. And this sentence is visually illustrated here. As you can see, there are three factors, according to this theory, three factors lead to or cause social conflict: materialism, capitalism, and class distinction. So according to this theory, according to Karl Marx, these three phenomena are negative. They are negative factors that lead to a negative result, which is social conflict. These are keywords in this theory: materialism, capitalism, class distinction, and social conflict. So we have to take them one by one just to understand what they exactly mean. According to Karl Marx, all people were created by God equal. But then when capitalism interfered in the lives of people, materialism and capitalism, and divided them into classes, then we have social conflict, which is, according to Karl Marx, it's evil. It's the evil force. Let's start with materialism. When someone prioritizes material things or material goods, then that is materialism. In other words, if you care so much about financial resources, about financial income, about material goods, if you have material goals in life, then that is materialism. So it's an attitude. It's an attitude towards your lifestyle, your philosophy of life, that you place a priority over material goods. So that's material. Of course, materialism has different meanings in different contexts. In philosophy, it's not exactly the same. But in socioeconomics, when we say materialism, we mean one type of materialism, which is economic materialism. And economic materialism means placing a high value on material gains, financial gains, money. If money becomes the goal of my life, then that would dub me as a materialist person. Which reminds me of David Ramsey's quote. He says, "We buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like." What does that mean? We buy things we don't need with money we don't have. Why not? Because we buy them with credit cards. So when you go downtown and buy something, you don't have the money because you buy it on credit. You pay later by installments. Economic materialism is associated with three negative personality traits. First one is non-generosity. It means a materialist. What is the sign of materialism in a person? When you notice that that person does not like to share his or her possessions with others, unwillingness to share their stuff is a sign of materialism. Another personality trait is envy. So when somebody gets jealous because someone else has something they don't afford or can't have, then that is a sure sign of materialism. And possessiveness means you're like a materialist person is always after gain uh, or ownership, wants to possess something, not because they need it, as David Ramsey already mentioned, but because they need to impress or sell us an image, their self-image, or they're working on advancement, social advancement, or they are social climbers. Uh, in all cases, it's not because they urgently need it. It's they possess things because they want to impress someone or just to sell a public image of themselves. So these are sure signs of economic materialism. And again, materialism is based on the concept that success and happiness depends on money. So if somebody believes that money and only money brings success and happiness, then that is a sign of materialism. Of course, we acknowledge that money brings success and happiness, but it's not the sole means to get this. But if somebody believes that it's the sole means to get it, then that is again a sign of materialism. The next term we have to know about, the next key term in this theory is capitalism. So, what is capitalism? When you take a society and you find that ownership is mostly by the private sector. So the private sector means private businessmen and owners, rather than by the government, then that is called capitalism. So it's moving property from the hands of the government to the hands of private businessmen. That is the meaning of capitalism. When like trade, the industry and business is controlled by private owners and not by the state. So this is the definition of capitalism. The third key word we have is class distinction. We know that class distinction is the stratification of class or the division of the society into two or more classes. So when we divide society into two or more classes, that is called class distinction. And it could be a reality or just an attitude. In other words, maybe you talk or believe that there are different social classes in a specific society. Maybe you believe in it, but it doesn't really exist. So it could be an attitude, not necessarily a reality. It could exist in reality or in the person's mind. If it exists in your mind, not in reality, that is an attitude. So your belief in it is also referred to as class distinction. And then we have the term social conflict. As you can see from this diagram, social conflict is the result, the outcome of these three factors. Remember this diagram when we come to the solution for this problem, for social conflict. But let's first just define social conflict. By social conflict, we mean when two members or more are struggling against each other in the same society. Why is there this struggle or this conflict? It could be because they want to climb on this social ladder to get more influence or more power or more material gains, because remember, materialism is one of the causes of social conflict. It could be because they want more influence, and it could be because they want to have access to resources. And it could happen at the level, at the individual level, like only two members are in conflict, or it could happen at the group level, and it could happen at the level of an entire social class. And it doesn't really matter which social classes are in conflict. The conflict could take place between the middle class and the upper class and the lower class, or the middle class and the lower class. If you look at this diagram, then you can see that social conflict is the negative outcome, the result of these three causes. So materialism, capitalism, and class distinction are causes of social conflict. So if we discuss the solution to this problem, then it would be very logical to say that if you just eliminate the cause, then you will automatically eliminate the negative outcome. Uh, Therefore, the solution to this problem is to get rid of materialism, capitalism, and class distinction. If you get rid of these three, then you will solve the problem because you will have no social conflict. So that's, according to Karl Marx, this is the solution for this problem. And this means what? This means, you see, if you don't have class distinction, if you eliminate it, then and along with materialism and capitalism, it means all people will become equal. So you restore the situation to what it was before materialism started taking over. If you eliminate these three, it means all people will become equal. And when all people are equal, then there is no social conflict. Okay, so this is the solution that Karl Marx provides for this problem. It's the only solution to all social problems is to restore equality among people. If you now go back to the origin of how this all started, how materialism started, we take, you remember when Karl Marx said at the beginning all men were created equal. So let's go back. What does he mean by at the beginning? He meant the first primitive human beings. They were cave dwellers. They lived in caves, so they did not have to build their own houses. Caves were naturally provided for man by nature, and man did not have to produce food. All he had to do is to find what's already there provided by nature, like food, water, accommodation. Everything was ready made, up for grabs. And then he discovered fire, and with the discovery of fire, he started, cooking, and this is a step ahead for the progress of the human race. But then things got complicated when man moved from hunting to farming. When man moved from hunting to farming, of course, this is an advantage, but it's also a disadvantage. Well, it's an advantage because man is progressing, but why is farming, the onset of farming, a disadvantage? When man discovered or invented farming, he had to move away from the caves. Why? Because farming requires, number one, fertile land, number two, water. You have to water what you plant. Therefore, the best place for farming was close to rivers because the land near a river is very fertile, and you're also close to the source of water. And this means he has to quit living in the caves. So he had to build his own accommodation. He had to build a house. So imagine now, man is no longer living in caves. He's living near the river, building his own house, and also uh, planting his own vegetables and fruits and having his own farm. When one, two, three, and more people do that, then this means that you are spending time and effort on producing food. You have to build your own house on that farm. The problem is when another person comes and has a farm next to you, then there's overlapping, like which one is my plant and which one is yours, which one is my farm and which one is yours. So here people started arguing, like this is my farm, not your farm. Like this is my tree, not your tree. Why? Because you planted it. It's not like before. Before this, before farming, nobody walks into a forest and says, this is my tree. Why? Because it's already there in nature. You did not spend time and effort on that tree. But now it's different because you planted that tree, looked after it, and helped it grow. So it's your tree. For the first time in history, we have these pronouns, mine and yours. And for the first time in history, we have the concept of property. Because before this, you cannot claim something as yours because it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to nature. But now you are producing it, so it's yours. So this concept of property emerged with the invention of farming. People started arguing like this is mine and this is yours. This is my farm, this is your farm. Don't trespass on my farm. Go to your farm. Then for the first time, people had to build fences. People had to build walls and fences to separate their property from others' property, to separate what's theirs from what's not theirs. And again, for the first time in history, we have a new concept, which is the concept of borders. Concept of borders. And borders really started from individuals, like houses, and then went to cities, and then to countries, developed into countries. And the conflict, yes, and you're right, the conflict also started at this point in history, in human history. I'm showing you how conflict started, how class distinction started. This is the history of class distinction and materialism. So now we have materialism, we have class distinction, um, and then we moved on. The last stage is capitalism. Now, of course, when people had their own farms, some of them, let's say they were more lucky or hardworking to the extent that they started having more land, more farms, more property, more influence, more power, and more money, while others remained as they were. So some people started getting more farms. Probably they were more intelligent, or they were like land grabbers searching for increasing their property. They were greedy, so they started getting more and more power and more land, and they became richer, more influential, more powerful. They became landowners. Others were very happy with what they had. They did not try, they were not very ambitious. They did not try to get more money and more power and more land. So so here some people got more powerful and richer than the others. Now people who were equal are now divided into two groups. One group who stayed as they are, farmers with limited property, and the others who gained more and more property and had more power. So we have two groups. And these two groups came to be called later the upper class and the lower class. This is the beginning of class distinction. Before this time, we did not have classes. But now, for the first time in history again, we have two classes. And we call the first the upper class. Sometimes it's called the aristocratic class or the aristocrats. And the feudal lord, right? Yes, that's right. And the lower class, farmers, or it also goes by the name working class. Now, what made the aristocrats the upper class? What makes an aristocrat an aristocrat? There are two factors that make an aristocrat an aristocrat. The first one is money. They have money. The second one is blue blood. Now, blue blood means what? It means that to be an aristocrat, you have to be born into an aristocratic family. It means if your parents are not aristocrats, then you cannot be an aristocrat. It's different from money, because money, it's okay, you can work hard and get money and become rich. It's something you can acquire in life. You can work hard, get money, and become rich. But that's not enough to become an aristocrat. You need blue blood. It means you have to be born to aristocratic parents. If your parents are not aristocrats, you cannot be an aristocrat. It's not something you can achieve in life. So these are the two factors that make up the aristocracy. Blue blood plus money. Both are important. By the way, the concept of blue blood, I mean, it if you come to think about it, it's a false assumption, because where did the aristocrats come from? The aristocrats were a division of the original society, which had no classes. It's not like people were living and then some other people from another planet, they came to planet Earth and they are aristocrats. No, because we didn't have aristocrats from the beginning. So the idea of blue blood is a false idea. It was invented by the upper class in order to prevent anyone from entering aristocracy. Another false notion, which was propagated by the upper class, is the divine right of kings. In the Middle Ages, for example, you have this concept of the divine, even up to the 19th century, people still believed in the divine right of kings. It means that The king is the representative of God on earth. So whatever the king says, it means God is saying that. We call that the divine right of kings. Like kings are uh, are given the permission by God to rule and do what they please, what they want. This is another false notion propagated by the upper class in order to maintain their control over the working class. So these two notions, blue blood and the divine right of kings, were invented by the upper class in order to prevent anyone from entering, trespassing their property, and in order to maintain, preserve their control over the working class. Up to now, we have two classes. So let's briefly talk about the differences between these two classes, the upper class and the lower class. In terms of birth, we said the aristocrats have blue blood, the lower class doesn't. In terms of wealth, the upper class is rich, the lower class is poor. In terms of power, the upper class has power, but the working class, the lower class is helpless. In terms of number, the upper class they form the minority and the lower class forms the majority. In terms of appearance, of course, the upper class are well dressed, and even the idea of blue blood, you know where it comes from? It's because the aristocrats are not exposed to the sun. They don't go out, and even when they're walking in the sun, they use umbrellas. Therefore, their skin is intact and not touched by sunlight, and you can easily discern the veins, the blue veins on their skin. Unlike the farmers who have a very coarse complexion because they're working under the sun all the time, so the blue veins do not show up on their skin, and that's why they're called blue blood, the aristocrats. You can discern the blue veins on their skin. In terms of lifestyle, the working class spend all their time working on the farm, but the upper class have more leisure, more free time. They practice their hobbies. They get to learn a lot of things, improve their skills. They write, they read, they are educated. And this brings us to, in terms of education, of course, the upper class are educated because they don't work. So what do? They educate themselves. But the lower class, they don't have time to. They are illiterate, uneducated. They don't know how to read and write, and because they don't have time to do that, they spend their time just securing their income, living, working on the farms. And even if they have time to go to school, they cannot afford it because of they're poor, they don't have money. So these are briefly the differences between these two classes. This is important also when you are analyzing a literary text that contains classes. You have to describe the differences between those like when you're analyzing a novel, you have to identify the social classes in the novel. So you compare the characters who belong to the upper class with the characters who belong to the lower class, and then you discuss these differences in the novel between them. Now we move on to the 18th century and the 19th century, the second half of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century. An important event took place in human history, and this is the Industrial Revolution. I'm sure you've heard of the Industrial Revolution, and its onset is almost towards the end of the 18th century, and how it changed many things. It changed the way people lived. It changed the economy of a country, lifestyle, society itself, their principles, and even it was reflected on in literature too, in art. So, what happened during this period, which we call the Industrial Revolution period? Let's take this man. He comes from, you remember, we have two classes, the upper class and the lower class. So imagine there is a man from the lower class, a man from the lower class, but he is a very ambitious man and very clever as a businessman. So he works very hard, he makes some money, and then he opens a workshop, a small workshop. To invest his money, he hires, let's say, 5 tailors who make clothes. So these tailors, they work in his workshop and they make clothes. He sells these clothes and he gets profit. This is a loom machine. It produces clothes. So he liked the idea and he bought this loom machine. And this loom machine can produce clothes just like those tailors. Only difference is that it makes more clothes than those uh, poor tailors because they are producing it manually. Now, this machine is producing it automatically, so it's faster. And it doesn't cost money. Why? Because you need only one man to operate this machine. So you don't need those tailors in your workshop anymore. What he did is he bought this machine and he doesn't need those tailors, so he just fired them. They're no longer needed. And he employed one man to operate this machine. And he produced more clothes than before. This means he increased his profit. When his profit got increased, he bought more machines like this one to make even more profit. And then where is he going to put these machines? He will put them in his workshop. So his workshop will turn into a factory. Because what is a factory? A factory is a building that contains machines. It's not like the workshop. Maybe he would develop, his make some changes to his workshop and turn it into a factory. Probably he will expand now and buy a bigger building because he has more money now. And again, for the first time, we have the word factory. This man built his own factory. Another businessman also made factories. So factories began to spread in Europe. This man now, he's getting richer and richer, making more and more profit. Remember, he belongs, or he used to belong, to the lower class. But because he's very ambitious and a hard worker and he has the mind of a businessman, he got more and more money. So now the question is, and this is my point, the question is, can he go to the aristocrats and say, I want to be an aristocrat? He wants to belong to the upper class. Can he do that? I have money, just like you, but you don't have. Is your father an aristocrat? He says, no. Is your mother an aristocrat? No. Then you're not an aristocrat. You can't belong to us. Now, and can he go back? Can he go back and say, okay, I'm now happy. I belong to the lower class. No, he doesn't like that anymore. He's rich. He cannot belong to the lower class anymore. So where do we put him? He doesn't like to belong to the lower class because he has money, and he can't belong to the upper class because he doesn't have blue blood. So very good. This is the rise of the middle class. They put him in the middle. They put him in the middle, but he's not the only man, the only person. There are many more like him. So they were sandwiched between the upper class and the lower class. So what do we call them? We call them the middle class. This is so for the first time in history, again, we have a new class. A new class appeared in the 18th century and 19th century. And it's all because of the Industrial Revolution. It added a new class to society. So instead of two classes, now we have three. And according to Karl Marx, the more social classes you have, the more conflict you have. The more social classes you create, the more conflict it causes, which means the situation will be worse than before. Now we have three classes. So, according to this theory, there will be more social conflict, which makes the problem of evil even worse. So now we have the upper class, they have blue blood and wealth. We have the lower class, poor lower class, zero blue blood and zero wealth. All right. And we have the middle class who are like the upper class and unlike them, and also like they are like the lower class and unlike them. They have wealth, but they don't have blue blood. They are stuck there in the middle, stuck there in the middle. And their ambition is to rise to the upper class as much as they can. They can't be part of the upper class, but they always try to pretend uh, they are aristocrats. They always act like aristocrats. And this is one of the themes in novels, especially 19th century the Victorian novel. One of the themes is affectation. Affectation is a very important theme which is related to this theory. It means how the middle class always try to imitate the upper class as if they were aristocrats. They know they can't be part of them, but at least they can imitate them in appearance, in behavior, in attitude. It's the theme of affectation. You can find this theme in many Victorian novels, like the novels of Charles Dickens and Jane Austen. Okay. Even this class, the middle class, it was further divided or subdivided into the upper middle class and the lower middle class. So upper middle class and lower middle, both of them are middle class, but the difference is in education. Some members of the middle class, they were just happy with money, and that's it. As long as we've got money, there's no problem. Others, no, they wanted to be educated as well because they have money. So they use their money to be educated. Because they educated themselves, they came closer to the upper class because the upper class are educated people. The middle class they have money but no education. But those members who tried to educate themselves, they got closer to the upper class. So we call them the upper middle class. Those who did not care about education, they only cared about money. So they have money but no education. They were closer to the lower class because the lower class were uneducated. So we call them the lower middle class. So now we have four classes, not three. We have the upper class, the upper middle class, the lower middle class, and the lower class, which makes the problem worse. So we discussed these terms, uh, materialism, capitalism, class distinction, and social conflict. And if you are analyzing a text, you have to find these key terms in the text. If you're analyzing a novel, you have to identify materialism in the novel. Who are the characters? Or you have to identify the capitalist concepts and the class distinction and social conflict in the novel. There are other terms which are important in Marxism: infrastructure and superstructure. Infrastructure is the economy of a society. Every society, or every country, let's say, has an economy. This economy, according to Karl Marx, is the infrastructure of that society. The superstructure is the cultural output of that society. Cultural output, what does that mean? It means what that society produces, like art, music, customs, tradition, literature. Literature is superstructure. So literature, education, this is the superstructure of a society. Now, according to this idea, the infrastructure can affect superstructure. Infrastructure can affect superstructure. It means that the economy of a society can determine the behavior of that society. If the economy is bad, the behavior will be bad. If the economy is good, the behavior will be good. And I gave you here on this slide an example. If the economy is bad, no money, then probably many people will become thieves. Why? Based on, do you remember the 6 types of behavior displayed as frustration? Because when the economy is bad and there is no money, and we said that money can indirectly lead to satisfaction of drives. If there is no money, there will be no satisfaction of drives, there will be frustration of drives. And at frustration, people might display 6 types of behavior. One of them is compensation and negative compensation. I'm not saying that all people will resort to negative compensation, but they will be tempted to. You see, bad economy will create a temptation. It will create a temptation for people. So some people will become thieves. And this will increase the crime rates in the society. Because crime is what? Crime is the result of social conflict. People commit crime in order to get an advantage. Now, if people are equal, they don't want to gain anything because they're equal. They have everything they need, and everybody has exactly the same thing they need. They will not become greedy. Equality will not create greed. So there will be less social conflict if the infrastructure is good. the superstructure. If the infrastructure is good, the superstructure will be also positive. When I tried to connect the infrastructure and its impact on the superstructure and how it determines or leads to one type of behavior at frustration, which is negative compensation. What I'm doing here is I am trying to find a connection between the psychoanalytic theory and the Marxist theory. And as I said, this is called an eclectic approach. So for example, if you are writing a thesis or a dissertation in your case, and you are following the eclectic approach and taking the Marxist theory and the psychoanalytical theory at the same time, it's not enough to take two theories at the same time. You have to show in the text how these theories are related. So for example, here, when I showed you how the infrastructure can affect, how a negative infrastructure leads to negative superstructure, which in turn leads to negative compensation, then I am establishing a relationship between the Marxist theory and the psychoanalytic theory. Two more terms are important in the Marxist theory, and they are reflectionism and interpolation. And you can think of them as that, like one of them is the opposite of the other. Now, reflectionism is how superstructure is determined by the infrastructure. Interpolation is how it's the opposite, is how the superstructure can affect the infrastructure. So when the infrastructure affects the superstructure, just like the example I gave you, bad economy can lead to bad behavior in society. This is called reflectionism. It means that the superstructure reflects the infrastructure. Superstructure, take for example, literature is superstructure. The infrastructure is the economy, the economic situation. So literature can reflect the economic situation. So from the novels you read, if you want to know the infrastructure of England during the Victorian age, you can see that in the novels. So if you read a novel by Charles Dickens, like Great Expectations or Hard Times, from the novel, you know the infrastructure of the English society during the Victorian age. The opposite idea is interpolation, which means that superstructure can influence the infrastructure. In other words, economy, if the superstructure is good, then the economy will be boosted, will be improved. We said good economy leads to good superstructure. Let's take education. Education is superstructure. Good economy will lead to good education. So if a society has good economy, then there will be more schools, more education. Now, if we have more education, it means we will have more educated people. There will be more doctors, more lawyers, more engineers, more businessmen. But if you have more businessmen, more marketing researchers, more doctors, more engineers, then this is going to open new doors to business, to economy, because these people will bring more business, more work. and there will be more projects. And when you have more business projects, then your economy will improve. So this is how superstructure can also affect the infrastructure. Economy will improve superstructure, like education, and education will improve economy. One of them supports the other and improves the other. And we also need to know something about the drawbacks of this theory. No theory is perfect. Every theory has loopholes, weak points, or drawbacks. So the downside of the Marxist theory, you cannot really achieve perfect equality because there are always individual differences. Some people are busy bees, others are couch potatoes. It means they are lazy. Imagine you are, let's say, an owner, proprietor of a business, or the manager. You have two employees, you give them the same salary. Now, one of them works very hard, is a hard worker. The other is very lazy. He's a lazy employee. Now, if you give them the same salary, it would not be fair. You give them the same salary because you want to create equality. Now, but the problem is that how can you give them the same salary if one of them works very hard and the other is lazy? Eventually, what will happen is that the hard worker will look at the lazy worker and will say, I'm working very hard day and night and I'm getting the same salary just like him. So why should I work very hard if I'm getting the same salary? This hard worker will be tempted to be lazy because you're not rewarding his efforts. You're treating him just like the lazy worker. So it's not fair. This is why I said equality is a good idea, but when it comes to reality, when you try to put it to practice, you will find that it's not practical. You cannot achieve perfect equality. Partial equality, yes, but perfect equality is a myth. Cannot be achieved. The other problem with this theory is capitalism. You remember we said the private sector, when the private sector controls trade in a society, then we have capitalism. To abolish capitalism, to eliminate capitalism, you need to move all property from the private sector to the public sector. Here is a problem because you will have responsibility issues. Why? Imagine there is a public park. Who takes care of the public park? You will say the public. Okay, but everybody's job is nobody's job. You cannot say everybody's job is to clean the park. Who is this everybody? It could be you, it could be me. Why should I go and clean the park? Why shouldn't my neighbor go and clean the park? So this is another loophole in this theory, in the Marxist theory. Now let's discuss how to apply the Marxist theory to literature. As we said, you have to go through steps. You have to take the characters. Suppose somebody gives you a novel and asks you to apply the Marxist theory to this novel. What are you going to do? You take the characters and you classify the characters into classes. Which characters make up the upper class in the novel? Which characters make up the working class? Which characters belong to the middle class? Is it the upper middle class or the lower middle class? and you identify materialism. Who are the materialist characters? Do we have materialism? You identify the capitalism in the novel. That are there capitalists or not? You identify class distinction. How many classes do we have in this novel as described in the novel? You have to refer to the novel, to the plot, to the events, to the characters, and take quotations from the extracts and quotations in order to support your view. You have to identify the social conflict in the novel. Like, is there social conflict? Who are the characters um, who are against each other, protagonists and antagonists? Do they belong or represent different classes or not? You have to show what the author is saying. What's the message of the author from this conflict, about this conflict? What's the cause of this conflict? Does the author say anything about the cause of this conflict and how to solve it? Does the author provide or suggest any solutions to this problem? Maybe not. Not all novels have solutions. They are open-ended novels. Uh, so these are the things that you have to do, and it takes a lot of time to analyze the novel in terms of a class distinction and social conflict and materialism. Let me give you an example. Let's apply this to an example. John Updike is an American writer, modern American writer, and he wrote a very nice short story. The title of the short story is ANP. ANP refers to a chain of stores in the United States. ANP stands for Atlantic and Pacific. Let me sum up the story for you. The main character in the story is Sammy. Sammy is a young man who works at one of the stores, one of the ANP stores. And he works as at the checkout line as a cashier. So customers who walk into the store and buy goods, they put all the goods in the basket, and then they go to the checkout line and then pay for their goods at the cashier, at the cashier's desk. Three girls walk into the store, but they are they are wearing bathing suits, so they're almost half naked. Of course, we wear bathing suits when we go swimming, but they walk into a store like this, not feeling ashamed or something. It's not just that; it's that they start shouting and laughing and attracting attention of the other customers. They feel so free there at the store, making such a big noise, and everybody's looking at them. And they're laughing, and very noisy girls, spoiled girls, spoiled rich girls. So they don't care about the rules and regulations. But Sammy looks at them and he's attracted to them, and he keeps like he's dreaming. He has these dreamy fantasies, like maybe he's going to marry one of them, especially the most beautiful. He was attracted to one of them. She calls herself Queenie, and he was waiting there for them to come to him, because he knew that after they buy some stuff and they come to the checkout, and definitely they will see him to pay for what they buy. So he was waiting anxiously for them to come, so probably he has a chance to make a date with one of them, develop a relationship with them. So when they arrive at the cashier's desk, face to face with Sammy, someone shows up. The manager shows up. Langle, the manager, shows up. And he looks at the girls and he's disgusted by their behavior and clothes. And he says, why you shouldn't walk into the store with such clothes. It's not decent. It's not polite. It's not ethical and not etiquette. This is against the policy of the store. We don't allow customers to enter like this. So he reprimands them. He shouts at them. But the girls, of course, they're here. They're very disappointed and angry, and they are, they're reprimanded here. Now Sammy thinks he's rising to the occasion. He wants to prove himself to be a hero in front of the girls. He defends them, and he starts shouting at the manager. And he says, he says, no, they are not doing anything wrong. He defends the girls. Now, the manager looks at Sammy, says, what are you saying? Why do you interfere? And he wants to prove himself to be a hero, Sammy. So he says, I quit. I quit my job. He wants to prove to the girls that he's the hero. While Sammy and the manager are having an argument, the three girls leave the store. So when Sammy tells the manager, I quit, the manager tries to persuade him not to quit. He says, how can you quit? Your parents don't have a job. They are depending on you. You're the only one who's providing money for the family. Why? What do you mean you quit? Why do you quit? He says, no, I quit my job. And then he leaves. He thinks that the three girls are waiting for him outside, and probably he'll marry one of them. And he has these pink dreams. So when he walks out, he finds that the girls are gone. And they don't care. They're just spoiled rich girls. They don't care about Sammy and the store and the manager. And for them, it's past. They just throw it over their shoulders. But then he realizes the girls are gone, and he's left out there and outside the store. He can't go back because he quit his job. So he lost both. He lost his job and he lost the girls. So he stands there disappointed, asking himself, what did I just do? Why did I do this? Okay. Why did I try to be a hero, for the day? And that's the end of the short story. Okay, so if you want to analyze this, you have to identify the classes and which characters belong to which class. Sammy belongs to the working class. Lenkel, the manager, belongs to the middle class. The three girls belong to the upper class. And the social conflict, you can see it in when the manager is reprimanding, rebuking the three girls. This is conflict between the middle class and the upper class. That the middle class is telling the upper class, you are breaking the rules. There are rules, but the upper class says, well, I don't care about rules. I have power, I have money, I can make my own rules. I don't care about them. And there is a conflict between the lower class, Sammy, and the middle class. The middle class is trying, or the manager is trying to persuade Sammy to work to keep his job, but he says no, he quits. So this represents the rebellion of the lower class against the middle class. You can analyze the story in terms of Marxism and even go further and give details and quote from the story to prove your point. And the message in this story is that whenever there is a conflict between two classes, the ultimate final victim is the lower class. But the girls, went home, there's no problem with them. The manager is still working in the store, there's no problem. But who lost his job? Sammy lost his job. So the lower class is the victim. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you and goodbye.